There is nothing worse than technical glitches on a live stream because,
Yes.
you
That's why I
can't.
want to come here instead of trying to do it from home.
Well, you might not be in any better shape
Oh,
here than
well,
you are at home. We have our glitches too. But yeah, I've had a few programs where, the technology just didn't cooperate
yeah.
and sometimes rather disastrously. But let's hope that we don't have this tonight. So we're in the confines of Willard Library or on the actual network. We should be just fine. So, and I think that we're actually live here. So let's do a show. What do you think?
All right.
Do a program. I'm Mac McCullough. I am giving you another episode of Stories at Sundown. Live streaming today from the confines of Willard Library. I'm in the bowels of Willard Library in the basement, and upstairs in our new creative space is Jody Owens. Jody is, I'll call her a researcher and an archivist with the Historical Society. I don't know if there's any official titles, but that's how I think of you. And you're also on the board.
Mm-hmm.
A long time history devotee of Battle Creek, but a lot of other things. You were a teacher at Athens High School.
Only 40 years.
Only 40 years. So, they probably don't remember you.
Yeah,
No,
right.
I know they do. I know at least one person does. We'll talk a little bit about that too. And, you've long been interested in telling Battle Creek stories. So I'm
Yes.
really, really excited to have you on. And I'm hoping that you'll cut up on this program just the way you cut up in my ear at the board meetings. How about that?
Should I whisper?
You can whisper.
All right.
So welcome to the program. How you doing?
Thank you very much. I'm not an archivist because to me that sort of stomps on Mary Butler's reputation, and I will never be able to fit her shoes.
Yeah.
In fact, the first anniversary of her death is coming up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. That must be hard. You worked with her a long time.
Oh yeah, I did. Almost 10 years.
Well, and she left quite a legacy.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's evidence of it every time I go over to the archive or the Kimball House, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. And I have some links to share for folks who don't know where those things are and want to learn more, and numbers and stuff like that. So, Jody, welcome to the program.
Well,
and,
thank you.
I think one of the questions I have for it, and we're going to get to your upcoming program at KCC, Lifelong Learning Program on Spiritualism, but obviously that has a deep historical tie, and we'll talk about that too.
All right.
But how was it that you became so enthralled in history? And I think I want to set this up as your school teaching years. Someone might think you were a history teacher. In fact, I think the Enquirer at one point called you a history teacher, and we had to correct.
I'm not a history teacher. I was an English teacher.
You were an English teacher, exactly. Mm-hmm. So where does this come from? Your love of history and love of Battle Creek history?
Well, this is pretty negative. It was really from reading high school history books because there are so many inaccuracies. I didn't know that until I got to college and found out all the fingers that went into making up a high school textbook and how many things were inaccurate. And then just trying to learn what was really the truth is what really got me started.
Yeah. And Battle Creek in particular, or more general?
More in general, but then more and more in Battle Creek.
Yeah. But you grew up in Battle Creek, right? Or did you grow up in Athens?
Yeah.
You grew up in Athens. And so, and you attended Battle Creek Central?
Excuse me? I attended Lakeview High School.
Oh, okay.
Lakeview schools, yes.
Okay. It wasn't an assumption.
Battle Creek
I guess it was.
When I was growing up, was the one that always kicked our butt in every sport we played.
So, yeah, talk a little bit about your life, your family,
Well, my dad came home from the war. Well, I'll back up one more step. He and my mom eloped, and a week later, he was stationed at Fort Custer. He was shipped out, and they didn't see each other for 3.5 years. Because, of course, then it was for the duration. And he got a job at Michigan Bell. And then my mom stayed home, and I'm one of 3 girls. I'm the oldest, as both the other ones remind me. And grew up going to going to Lakeview High School, went to Hope College, which was a really good fit for me because it was not enormous.
Uh-huh.
And I still have ties with Hope. And then went to Athens for 40 years. And at the same time, 26 of those years, I taught at Lakeview Adult Ed at their night school. I taught English for high school credit.
Yeah.
So
I have a story to relate. I've been threatening to tell you, but it's not a bad story. It's actually a good story. One
all
of my
right.
colleagues here, Melissa McPherson, actually, it was years ago that she said, when she found out that I know Mrs. Owens, I was like, oh, you mean Jody? Um, yeah, and she has this story that she took your English class and you read to them out loud. And she wasn't sure whether it was of Mice and Men or One
It
Flew Over
was
the
of
Cuckoo's.
Mice and Men.
It was,
Yes.
yeah. What was that about? I mean, I've
Well,
never had a
I
teacher
did
read.
different voices for different characters.
Yeah, that's what she liked about
Yeah,
it.
that's what they liked.
Yeah. And so that was a technique that you used to get young people involved in books.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, they did a lot of reading on their own, of course, but sometimes if I thought they weren't going to understand it without some help, then sometimes I would read parts of it in
Uh-huh.
different voices.
Well, I think I know it worked with Melissa because she got the book and read along as you read out
Mm-hmm.
loud.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just wanted to pass that along that
Well,
you are
thank
one
you.
of her favorite teachers, and she still thinks about you and talks about you whenever she gets the chance. So quite a testament. I come from a family of educators myself, so I didn't measure up to
What level?
that. High school, high school. So oh, and my mom was a teacher's aide,
Oh, okay.
also a teacher in her own right, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And so, how did you get involved in the historical society, and talk a little bit about what you do there?
Um, Once I was no longer teaching, which was at the end of 2009, I was just really at loose ends. I had been so busy during my years of teaching, and all of a sudden, this vast desert of nothingness stretched in front of me. And it was actually Marilyn Strobel who suggested that I go meet Mary Butler and offered my services as a volunteer. And I did, and that's where we've been since then.
Yeah,
And meeting,
Marilyn, who chimed in a little bit ago
yes,
when you mentioned
yeah,
Mark. Yeah,
yes, we had the same demented sense of humor, Mary and I, so it worked out really well.
and so your work there. I mean, you're there Tuesdays and
Mhm,
Thursdays
mhm.
at the and you and pull a lot of other duty as well at
Right.
The Kimmel House Museum. But talk about what's in the archive.
Oh my goodness.
I know.
Well, I have this really neat friend named Matt McCulloch who brings surprises over to the archives. And you just never know when you open up one of the boxes what you'll find. The last batch that we got was a handwritten um, agreement between the city and the people who were beginning Kingman Museum,
Yeah,
um, giving land for Lila Arboretum. And there was also a typed copy, but it was also the original written copy. And when our president, Bill White, took it out to the Lila Arboretum Society, they didn't even know it existed. They had no idea. So that was just such a neat thing to find.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's one of the things I love working with you. I mean, a lot of these things are like tucked away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, unless you have hours and hours of time every day to like
Mm-hmm.
leaf through every page, you never know what you're going to find.
Right.
But I feel like collectively, we're really, you know, I mean, you've been at this a lot longer than I have, but it's just as like, anytime you have the time to spend, you're just turning over these new nuggets of gold.
Right.
And so I think,
I just wish that more people would come and see us.
yeah,
I mean, it sounds funny when people want to come. You say, well, you go to the hospital and you come in through the doors and you get through the guard and then you go to the basement. But I think we're very, very well organized for
yeah,
the size that we are.
Yeah.
And pretty much we can help you find something on the topic that you're interested in.
Yeah. Yeah. You might overwhelm somebody because sometimes the volume is
Hmm.
pretty strong. But yeah, you are. I mean, that's another reason I like going over there. If I'm looking for something, I know you're going to come out with the right box.
Hmm.
You know, it may be this big, but you're
Well,
going
one
to
of
come
the
out.
high points of my career was getting a letter from California from whatever studio produced that Battle Creek police thing that was on for one season.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I got to give them permission to use some picture of downtown.
I think I gave him a newspaper rack too from the Inquirer. It was our brush with fame.
Yes, I know. 15 minutes.
So I do have on the screen there. I have the contact at the for the archives at the Historical Society of Battle Creek, Michigan.
Hmm.
Um, but the archive itself is open to the public
Oh, yeah.
Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Right.
From what time to what time?
1 to 4,
Okay.
Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we are in the basement of the Fieldstone Hospital across the street from Grace Health and next door to the fire station.
Yep. And you walk in the door there and you pick up, just like you just described, you pick up the security phone because it's a hospital and people are treated there.
Hmm.
So there is some control, but you pick up the receiver and say, "Hey, I'm going to the archive," and they buzz you in, and you go down the elevator,
Hmm.
and you kind of walk into this treasure trove of history. I mean, geez, Battle Creek has a lot of history.
Well, and a real shout out to the hospital that they, this was before I started volunteering there, but I know that for the 2 large offices that they let us use, we pay a grand total of $1 a year. And so that means we can do other things with the money that we are able to raise or the grants that we do have.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because for whatever reason, local history is not like this huge money maker. You have to scrap,
I know.
but it seems like it should be because the stories are just amazing. You and I
Mhm.
were just talking right before we went live about Lila Post Montgomery, who I didn't know was a graduate of Battle Creek Central,
That's right.
and that was C.W. Post's second wife. And Lila Arboretum bears her name,
Yes.
as did
As did the hospital.
Lila Hospital.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, these are world-renowned people. C.W. Post and his
Mhm.
family and his heirs, and there's just a
And
lot of that in Battle Creek.
the part that's kind of swept under the rug is that she started out as Lila's companion, the second wife.
Ah,
I, I'm sorry, started
Mar-
out as Marjorie's
Marjorie's, yeah,
companion. Marjorie was Post's daughter. Started out as a companion to her, as many rich girls had in those days. And then all of a sudden, these 2 who are about the same age, one is the daughter and one is the mother.
yeah. There are some scandals and there are some things like that. I mean, Mary, I mean, was famously quoted all the time as saying, "There's more history in Battle Creek than any other." I'm paraphrasing poorly, but something along those lines.
Yeah.
When you think of the Post, the Kellogg's, the Whites, Truth, just on and on. We could go on all night. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on is that you have a program coming up at Kellogg Community College about
Yes.
in the lifelong learning program about spiritualism.
Indeed.
And what is the name of this program?
Spiritualism.
So, yeah, I want to know more about that. I want to know more about how you came onto that. And
I
this is
got
also,
interested when
go
I
ahead.
found out that at one point, the 2 biggest centers for spiritualism were Buffalo, New York, and Battle Creek, Michigan. I mean, neither of them are huge cities or really centrally located compared to other large cities. But that was just really interesting to me. So that's how I got into looking up what the history was in Battle Creek.
Yeah. And so how did spiritualism influence Battle Creek's history? And how did it make Battle Creek what it
Um,
is?
there were some Quakers who were interested in spiritualism. And of course, we had a good settlement of Quakers here. In fact, um, several of them, very, very involved in the Underground Railroad. And so from that, they had invited some spiritualist speakers. Okay, one of them was a man named, just a minute, I'm going to cheat and look. One of them was a man named Warren Chase, and he was a Quaker, but he became a spiritualist as well, and he was called the Lone One, a very popular speaker. And then that drew people to Battle Creek. And then the one that really had the biggest influence probably was Dr. Peebles.
Yes.
And he had a really interesting history. He came through, first he was working with hypnotists on stage, doing hypnotism. And then he got involved in spiritualism. And then he got involved in patent medicine. But he came to Battle Creek and moved to, along with this Warren Chase, out to Harmonia, the settlement of Harmonia.
Right.
And it must have been very charismatic. He drew in a lot of people, to the point that in March of 1877, we held here in Battle Creek the national celebration of the 29th anniversary of modern spiritualism.
Wow.
And pulled in, I have no idea how many people, but speakers, 50 different speakers.
Wow.
And then again in 1881, we had the camp meeting out at Gogwak Lake. So we were very much on the map in terms of people coming to hear what we had to say about spiritualism.
Yeah. I want to get back. I want to talk about what spiritualism is, but putting it in context. I mean, Battle Creek was sort of a happening place for religion. Think about the time and
Right.
naturally in that history, there was such a yearning that, communal living was very prominent in that part of the century. Communes. I don't think they called them communes, but they were. I think there was something like 200. The Great Awakening, which inspired the creation of the Adventist Church, Second Great Awakening, I should say, that led the whites to come to Battle Creek and establish it. But also mentioned the Quakers and the Quaker community and the abolitionist community.
The phrenologists, the ones who felt the bumps on your head and could tell you about yourself.
Yeah.
Vegetarians, which of course became a very important part of the Seventh-day Adventists.
Right.
And it had, in a sense, it started with the Millerites that were, and he had predicted exactly when the world would end. And so he encouraged all these people to sell all of their belongings and to gather on this hill waiting for it to happen. And when the time passed, instead of everyone being angry, he said, well, you know what? It's still going to happen. I just calculated incorrectly. And so a lot of people broke off. And that's where like Seventh-day Adventists and in a sense, the Mormons and some of the others came from.
Yeah.
But there were just so many. And then Swedenborgians, I'm not sure. I know that they believed, like spiritualists, that you could communicate with the dead.
Yeah, yeah.
And the thing with spiritualists is that they believe not only could you communicate with the dead, but that they were anxious to communicate with you.
Mm-hmm.
That their lives went on in terms of bettering themselves. So in that sense, they were wiser than we were, just as, mortal human beings. And so they were anxious to pass on the wisdom that they had gained with us.
Wow. Well, and you mentioned that Miller's failure. It was called the Great Disappointment. I mean, you pin all your hopes on the end of the world and it doesn't come. Doesn't seem disappointing to me, but I guess that's from a different context. But and Harmonia, of course, was famously Sojourner Truth's first home in the Battle Creek area. Her daughter lived there, and she joined her daughter. Am I right? Yeah.
And she was never a spiritualist,
Right.
but she felt at home there in Harmonia with the other residents.
Yeah.
And not
Well,
everyone in Harmonia was a spiritualist.
right. Yeah. Well, and we always talk about accuracy or our commitment to it. I mean, even today, I was reading websites about Sojourner Truth embracing spiritualism,
Hmm.
um, on reputable websites,
Right.
not just
Well, and there are
private.
others that will tell you that she was a Seventh Day Adventist,
Yeah.
and she attended the church, but she never joined the Seventh Day Adventists.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Always interesting to keep learning. So, and speaking of learning, and I'm going to put up a link if people want to figure out how they can attend this. But what will folks learn? You gave me about
actually,
6 pages of handwritten stuff here. So
the most popular time for spiritualism was during and after the Civil War and during and after the First World War. And that just resonated with all of the families who had lost loved ones and really lost them because the records were so spotty and people were buried hastily. And there were hundreds and hundreds of families who had no idea what happened to their loved ones. And so communicating with them through spiritualism was a way to find out what had happened to them. Were they okay? How had they died? Did they have any messages they wanted to impart? And so part of it is messages from Civil War soldiers. Part of it is, for a long time, historians poo-pooed the idea that Lincoln was involved in spiritualism, but he was. Of course, his wife, Mary,
life certainly
was,
was. Yeah.
a great believer in spiritualism.
Yeah.
And so many historians will say, well, he went to placate his wife. Well, that's not true.
Right.
He went because he was also interested. He took two of his cabinet members at one time. And then the same with World War One. A number of people trying to find out what had happened. It was such a bloodbath, and so many thousands of men at some of the battles. And the trench warfare. In 6 months, you might have advanced a few yards, and they just wanted to know something more about their families, about their loved ones.
Right. Now, in your course, you talk a little bit about spiritualism in Battle Creek, but you also get into some of the terminology, and I guess a little bit of what spiritualism is and what it is not. Is that not? Is that correct?
Hmm.
What assumptions do people make
Well,
when you use the word spiritualism?
there still is a spiritualist church, a religious branch of spiritualism, but there's all these other kind of side roads of spiritualism that it's not really a religious movement, like precognition or premonitions or clairvoyance. All of those things come under the umbrella of spiritualism, and you don't need to be a medium in order to get some kind of sign from a loved one who's passed, or to have your own premonition about something that's going to happen. And so
Hmm.
all of that counts as spiritualism too.
And how do things like this differ from things like clairvoyance or premonitions?
Well, clairvoyance is just, I have the definition, the future of perceiving things or events in the future or beyond the normal sensory contact. Okay, and really clairvoyance and precognition are pretty much interchangeable as terms.
And is that part of the spiritual movement as well, though? I mean, those qualities, those.
Well, in the spiritualist movement, if you're talking about the spiritualist church, it was the mediums who imparted the information.
Right.
Okay, and so you had to be a medium, and that's where so much, trickery came in, so much fake information
Right.
came in. But you and I could have a premonition about something. It could be a dream, or it could be, you can't make it come. It just is like a flash of insight. And that would be true about clairvoyance as well. Just it could be about you or it could be about someone else.
Right.
Want an example?
Yes, please.
Oh, good. Okay. Abraham Lincoln, the war was over. The war had ended. And Abraham Lincoln, of course, had aged so and had worried so throughout the war. And so he had a dream before, well, obviously before he went to the theater. He had a dream. And in the dream, he woke up and he heard crying. And it seemed to be coming from the public rooms downstairs. So he went downstairs and the doors to the East Room were open. And there were guards stationed at the doors. And that was so unusual. He went to the guards and he said, when he looked in, there was a catafalque that a casket rests on. And so here's the catafalque and here's the casket. And he says to the guard, "Who is dead in the White House?" And the guard said, "The president, sir. The president has been assassinated."
Ooh.
And Edwin Stanton heard that story from Lincoln, and he was so taken by it that he wrote it in his, diary journal that so many kept at that time. So that's the authentication that it wasn't a story that developed after he had been assassinated, that it was something that he told people before he went to the theater.
Wow. Okay, now the cynic might say, well, he's had a lot of death threats.
Oh, yeah.
It would have been easy to say.
Another one that was Lincoln, he was just such a fascinating guy in terms of his like movement towards spiritualism. But he had been elected, but they were still in Springfield. And he was lying down, just taking a little nap. And when he woke up, he went to the mirror and, to smooth his hair. Not that much could be done with it. And when he did, here's his face, but then to the side and back a little bit, here's his face again, but it's really pale, really ghostly looking. And blinked his eyes, and finally when he turned his head and turned back, it went away.
Wow.
And so he told Mary, who was very much into spiritualism, and she said right away, "Well, you know what that means, don't you? It means that you're going to be elected to 2 terms of the presidency, but you'll only live through the first one."
Wow.
And that's before he even went to Washington to take the oath of office.
Yeah. Wow. So I don't know how deep your knowledge or theories are, but are people intuitively perceptive, or how does that?
Some more than others.
I see.
I guess I'm not an expert. I've just been reading about this for a little while, but all of us have some intuition.
Yeah.
But there are some people who have more, who can read body language, for instance, or who are better at interpreting people's voices and the emotions that they're expressing. But all of us have some intuition. And then there are people who are kind of super sensitive. They pick up on things that other people might miss.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. I'd love to be a part of the class. I'm busy that night, but
well, you could come to Wednesdays. It's Great Fires of America.
Oh, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do that. I've read. We've all read a lot about how the number of people affiliated with organized religion continues to drop. I'm wondering if spiritualism is experiencing the same or just the opposite. Do you have any insight on that? A lot of people today will say, "I'm not religious, I'm spiritual."
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean they're
no, that doesn't mean spiritualist.
Right.
I think that the reason for the sharp decline in spiritualism as a religion is because so many fakes were attached themselves to the movement, and there were so many just false messages being given that people lost faith in there ever being any true messages.
Yeah. Yeah. One could argue about other churches as well in the same vein.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right.
But yeah, it is fascinating. Um, yeah, and again, viewers, if you'd like to learn more, I'm going to put that up one more time because I know it's not always easy to write these things down real quick. But you can learn more about it by going to the KCC website and just /community/lifelong learning.
Well, and a shout out to KCC. I thought when I started doing classes there that every community college did that, and that's not true at all. I don't know any community colleges around us that have a lifelong learning program. And if you're not familiar with it, it's not for grades. There aren't tests. You don't get credit for it. They usually meet maybe 1 or 2 times for 2 hours each. And it's just for fun. There's, sewing and cooking and exercising and spiritualism and all different kinds of things. The little catalog usually comes out with your paper, I think, in January again.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a great opportunity. I've had the opportunity to be a guest speaker at classes in the past. Yeah, it's just a great opportunity to just be curious and learn. So, well, I really appreciated your time with me this evening.
Well, thank you very much.
Any other things that you want to impart? Someone just turned the light off in here. I'm getting a message.
Spiritualist.
It must be a
do I have time to tell one Mark Twain story?
Yeah, please do.
Okay. Well, but he was a lot of things. He was a newspaper reporter, and he was a riverboat pilot and all kinds of things before he settled down to just being an author. And his younger brother was also a riverboat pilot. And so they had gone down the Mississippi together. And then Mark Twain had gotten in a fight with the captain, so he couldn't be the pilot going back up the Mississippi. So he was on another boat, but his brother stayed on the boat that they both come down on. And that boat was ready to go before Mark Twain's. So the brother went off up the Mississippi River, and the boat got as far as Memphis, and the boilers exploded. Wow. And there was just enormous loss of life, burned and crushed and drowned. And his brother was very, very badly burned, but was pulled from the wreckage alive. And of course, there weren't hospitals as such. So he was taken into the home of one of the wealthy ladies there in Memphis. And they did everything they could to try to, save him. And the burns were just too extensive. And he died. Well, prior to that, Mark Twain had been in Hannibal. And whenever he'd go, he'd stay with his sister because he was always up and down the river. And that's where he grew up. And he'd had a dream that his brother had been in a terrible accident on one of the boats, one of the river boats, and that he had heard about it and went into where his brother's body was. And there was his brother. They had 2 chairs pushed together and the casket between them, and that he went in and was paying his respects, bowed his head, maybe saying a prayer. And then when he opened his eyes, there was a red rose that someone had placed on his brother's chest. So once in Memphis that the riverboat really did explode, Mark Twain, soon after started his journey back up the Mississippi, and the body was still in Memphis. And so he went to like some kind of public hall or something. And there was his brother's body, 2 chairs pushed together, and the casket resting between them. And he went in and looked, and there was no rose. And he just closed his eyes and said a prayer. And quietly, while he was praying, a woman had come in and placed a red rose on his brother's chest.
Wow.
I love stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and if anybody out there loves stuff like that, sign up for this class.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining me, Jody. It's a lot of fun. Always
Okay.
is. Always is. And so next week, our next guest is a local entrepreneur, Tiffany Blackman, who will be joining us. Do you know Tiffany,
Okay.
Jody?
Well, I really appreciate you doing these stories because it whets people's appetite to learn more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
People and places and events that they would have had no idea about.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. All right. Well, everybody, you have a good evening and join us next week for another episode of Stories at Sundown.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye bye.